Tonight's witness is Rebekah, and you're going to have to use your imagination. She's a much younger girl, in her 30s, a relaxed, happy person. The witness, Rebekah. Simon, whom they now call Peter, is married to my younger sister. Andrew, his brother, is married to my second cousin, also younger than I am. I didn't think I'd ever get married, but I am, and to the only man I ever loved. And I owe it all to the carpenter, Jesus. Jesus is dead and gone. It's nearly 4 years since they killed him, and I miss him as much now as I did when I first heard about it. I named my little boy Jesus. My mother lives with me now. 7 years ago, when Jesus first came to live in Capernaum, I lived with her in Simon's house, not far from the synagogue and nearer to the shore where the boats were kept. Andrew lived about 4 streets away. We lived well. Simon and Andrew and the sons of Zebedee made a good living as fishermen. They've never done anything else. It's difficult to think of them now as preachers and healers. Jesus brought many changes to this family. I'd known my husband Igor since we were children. We're much the same age. When I was about 16, beginning to think of getting married, Igor had his first attack. He tore his clothes and ran through the town screaming about death and devils. He frothed at the mouth and was like an animal. He didn't harm anyone, although by the time he was cornered and locked up, he himself was scratched and bleeding. The elders and doctors of the town examined him and then told my father that Igor was possessed by a demon, that he would be kept locked up for a time. They said that marriage was out of the question, that the laws of Moses forbade it, and that the Prince of Darkness would use the demon to father devil children and crippled freaks who would be blind or have extra limbs. Okay. Igor was kept locked up for nearly a year. He was calm, normal, remembered nothing of his attack. He was allowed out. And about a month later, when we were alone together in the little park near the jetty, it happened again. He went as white as a sheet, rigid in every limb. His eyes became huge and staring, seeing terrible things, and he started to scream. I could do nothing with him at all. People came, and he was put away again. And so the years passed. My younger sister married Simon, and I prayed for Igor. His attacks became more frequent, but because he never harmed anyone but himself when he fell down or knocked into things, he was not locked away for more than a day or two. He would spend a lot of time in and around the synagogue, sweeping and polishing and planting flowers. He knew every word of every service. People got used to him. He was harmless. The town loony, some people called him, despite the fact that when he was all right, he was as sane as and better educated than most of the people who called him names. Then my father died, and my mother became ill. She used to feel faint and get blinding headaches, and terrible fever would begin. She'd pour with sweat and shiver. It would last some time for days and would leave her weak and pale for a week or so. Simon was marvelous. He took us both into his house, so that my mother would have both her daughters near her when she was ill. It was practical and kindly. Poor Eagle would come occasionally for a meal, but he was poor company. Over the years, he'd become silent and frightened of the demon, as he called his illness. Then, one day, Andrew started talking about the baptizer, John, who was preaching in the south. Andrew became a follower and would go to hear John whenever he could. One day he took Simon, and they both came back talking about another person, a kinsman of John called Jesus from Nazareth, not far from here. It seems that John himself thought Jesus was very special in some way. Well, about 2 months after that, Simon came in very excited and told us that Jesus had decided to leave his hometown of Nazareth and come and live here in Capernaum. My mother and I were a bit worried about the news, for Andrew and Simon, the Zebedee boys, James and John, seemed to talk of nothing but Jesus, and hardly anyone had ever heard of. Simon told us that Jesus would arrive that night and stay with Andrew, and the next day, the Sabbath, would speak in the synagogue. "You come too," they said to my mother and myself. "If you're there, Yigal will behave. You know how any excitement sets him off." We said we would, but the next morning my poor mother began to have one of her bad turns, as bad as she'd ever had. My sister stayed to look after her, and I went to the synagogue, partly to keep an eye on Yigal, but mainly to see this Jesus. The synagogue was packed. So was the women's section behind the lattice, which cut down how much I could see, except at the side where there was a gap. But I was late, and the space near the gap was crowded, and no one would move, so I heard more than I saw. The service was normal up to the part where the rabbi or teacher speaks, which was to be Jesus. He was the day's rabbi. He had a marvellous voice, deep and strong, with a Galilean accent which can be harsh, but in his case wasn't. He spoke simply and seemed to have a sort of certainty, authority. We listened to it all and understood every word. He made word pictures that we knew about, of fishermen and boats and catches and working together and mending nets and being watchful of the clouds, looking up often. When he'd finished, there was absolute silence. Then Yigal began to scream at the top of his voice. It was absolutely unexpected and frightened people out of their wits. Then I heard Jesus' voice cut into the screaming like a knife and cut it off. I fought my way through the crowd in the corner and looked through the gap. Yigal had fallen down and Jesus was helping him up. Yigal looked dazed, but at peace and happy. They walked out together like friends. It was pandemonium. When I caught them up, Simon and Andrew were with them. I took Yigal's hand and he turned and looked at me. He looked different. The frightened look had gone. "No more demons," he said. "Jesus said so. I'm cured." And I knew it was true. I had no doubts at all. I told Simon about my mother being so unwell, and he told Jesus. When we got home, we went straight through to her room. She was in a terrible state, shivering and flushed and burning hot, soaked with perspiration. Jesus stood near her bed and looked down at her. Her head stopped rolling from side to side, and her eyes opened and looked into his. The shivering slowly stopped. A shudder went through her once or twice, and then she was still. Jesus touched her hand. "Come," he said, and he and the men left. My mother got up immediately, and by the time my sister and I had helped her wash and change and do her hair, her colour was gone, and she was bossing us and worrying about what to make for lunch. The stories of my mother and Jägel spread like the wind, and by the time the sun went down, there were hundreds of people outside the home. Sick people, their friends, families who brought them. Jesus put his hand on them, and one by one made them better. Even those with demons, like Jägel. The elders withdrew their objection, and Jägel and I were married. Jesus came to the wedding. He and the disciples, there were 12 by then, gave us a gift. It was a little demon made of copper.